frame in the same narrative as Professor Dame Louise Richardson has set it out. And he accuses us of quoting liberally from this. I quote, "I am absolutely aghast at the way that this is written. I think it's badly written. I think it's serving a self-serving narrative and a framework, a framed debate." And now we're going to have a debate, as Deputy Harkin has pointed out, on this report, not on neutrality, not on how we can use it in any positive way whatsoever. There is no confusion on my part or anybody that I've listened to here today as to what neutrality means. It means taking an active, proud role in world affairs. It's not stepping back. It's not what certain sections of the media tells us is free riding. It is about using our voice and our experience to promote peace. Can you imagine, Minister, instead of talking about a military-industrial complex and vast profits, because they're the only people winning, the companies who are now equal partners on level with the Commission and various unelected officials in Europe. Can you imagine if we used our collective voices to promote peace in the world? No, we're not doing that. We're absolutely not doing that. We're all of the time getting rid of our neutrality bit by bit by bit. Indeed, the European Defence Agency and the European Defence Fund, we had a 45-minute limited discussion with a guillotine on that very recently to allow for a debate. While I understand from comments in the media that the European Defence Agency Fund had representatives in Ireland wined and dined lately and entertained by members of the government in relation to facilitating future arms industry. Now, I really would, I mean, it's probably naive of me to think that the government might see sense and not see the motion as a risk or as a danger, and rather as an open invitation to stand together and assert our policy of neutrality in a world that greatly needs our voice, and that and significantly again, I will go back and finish on the Tánaiste, again, using Ukraine, condemning Ukraine, not a mention of Israel. That undermines our credibility as a neutral state.
Thank you, Deputy. As the debate is concluded, I now put the question on the Government's amendment as follows. The question is that the amendment be made. Deputies in favour say tá. Deputies who are against?
Neil.
In my view, the motion has been carried.
Vote on.
The vote will be deferred till the weekly division this evening. Thank you. Standing Order 36. I call on Deputy MacDonald. You have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Taoiseach, why did your government take the decision to drastically underfund the health service in budget 2024? A health service that's already under enormous pressure, with record treatment waiting lists, a year-round trolley emergency, and an ever-worsening recruitment and retention crisis. Against that backdrop, you chose, with your eyes wide open, to blow a massive €1.3 billion hole in funding for the health services that people rely on. At the Health Committee yesterday, the head of the HSE, Bernard Gloucester, described your underfunding of the health service as highly unusual. But I think Mr Gloucester was being very diplomatic. I would describe your decision as mind-boggling, Taoiseach. Incredibly, at a time of record hospital overcrowding, your budget doesn't provide one additional red cent to fund even one additional hospital bed. And perhaps the most shocking thing is what your decision means for major clinical programmes and national health strategies. So, how much new money has been given to the new National Stroke Strategy, Taoiseach? Answer, zero. How much new money has been given to fund new medicines for patients fighting cancer? Zero. How much money has been given to improve our maternity services, Taoiseach? Zero. ADHD clinics that were promised 2 years ago still haven't been opened. How are they going to be funded, Taoiseach? And what do you say to those who are waiting for those clinics to open? Your decision will have a real impact on families who face some of the biggest challenges of their lives. Families that need government to fund major improvement in the health service, but instead you choose to make things even worse. The recruitment embargo means thousands of vital frontline posts that were supposed to come online will not be filled. Junior doctors, healthcare assistants, home helps. 7,000 vital posts needed for the winter ahead have already been scrapped. And the consequences for people will be very real. Make no mistake, Taoiseach, you make this choice in full knowledge of the consequences, guaranteeing that the crisis in our health service will continue, chronic waiting lists will continue, overcrowding will continue. And people see very clearly now a government that has thrown in the towel on health. So, when a child with scoliosis is told that they have to wait even longer in pain for surgery, when a sick grandmother is left even longer on a hospital trolley, when a cancer patient can't get the new drug that could change their lives, people will then remember your catastrophic decision, Taoiseach. Tá tú tar éis éirí as an seirbhís sláinte a thucrú, is tubaiste é bhuair gine gan bhuainú a dhéanamh ar an seirbhís sláinte agus cathair é sin a réiteach. Taoiseach, you delivered your budget 2 weeks ago, and now a health service plan will be presented with a deficit of €1.3 billion built in. It's now widely accepted that you underfunded the health service. So we need clarity now as to who made this decision. Whose bright idea was this? Was it yours? Was it the Minister for Health? Was it the Minister for Finance? Or perhaps it was the man seated next to you, the Minister for Public Expenditure? Because somebody in government pushed for this, Taoiseach, and patients and people who will suffer as a result have a right to know whose decision was this. So can you tell us, please, who made this disastrous call?
Thanks, Deputy. The answer to your question is the government makes these decisions. The government acts collectively and signed off on the budget as a collective and accepts collective responsibility for the budget, including the health dimension of it. And ultimately, of course, it's a decision of the Dáil, because it's the Dáil that votes on estimates and it's the only body that allocates money to the health service, at least from a political point of view. Deputy, the health budget is always a challenge. And not something that's unique to Ireland by any means. Health services all over the world struggle to come in on budget, and in Ireland that's no different. It's always been a challenge. Long before I was a TD, the health budget was a challenge for governments, and no matter how much is allocated, there will always be calls for more, and whether the increase on an annual basis is a big one or a small one, there will almost always be a requirement for a supplementary. And 2023 and 2024 isn't going to be any different. But I do need to set out some of the facts, because a lot of what you said, Deputy, was characteristically misleading. First of all, the budget for 2024 is the biggest ever, €22.5 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than €4,000 for every man, woman and child in the state going to the HSE. It's a considerable amount of money. The waiting list initiative is fully funded. The Emergency Department programme is fully funded, and far from there being a recruitment embargo, the HSE will be allowed to hire 2,000 extra staff in addition to replacements throughout the course of 2024. When I was Minister for Health, not all that long ago, the budget for health was 14 or 15 billion euros, and an increase in any one year of 500 million euros would have been something I would have given my left hand for, quite frankly. Since then, we've seen the health budget increase by somewhere between 60 and 70%. Yes, our population has grown. Yes, it's got older. Yes, there is medical inflation, but not to that extent. These are real increases, and they have made a real difference, by the way. Our life expectancy is now one of the best in the entire world. Despite your misleading comment, waiting lists peaked after COVID and have fallen by about 20% since then. Not the case in most European countries where waiting lists are still rising. That's not to say that people aren't waiting too long. They are in their hundreds of thousands. But waiting lists have peaked and have fallen 20% from the peak. Patient outcomes are better than ever before, particularly in areas like stroke and cancer and cardiovascular disease. And at the moment, while we experience overcrowding in too many of our hospitals too much of the time, generally speaking, take any day this week, roughly 100 or 120 fewer patients waiting for a bed than would have been the case this time last year. Medicines are less expensive. Free GP care has been extended to the majority of the population. We've abolished hospital charges. We're ending the public-private mix in our public hospitals with the new Sláintecare contract. Contraception is free for women under 31, and state-funded IVF is now available. These are real changes for the better, done by this government, done under the leadership of Minister Donnelly, and that extra money is making a difference. In terms of recruitment, Deputy, as I said, while we do have recruitment and retention challenges in some parts of the health service, what we've actually seen in the past 3 years is a recruitment surge. More than 22,000 extra staff working in our public health service, roughly equivalent to the entire population of Longford. That's how many people have been hired and added to our health service in the past 3 years. And that includes 6,000 more nurses and midwives, 2,000 more doctors, and capacity there for the HSC to hire another 2,000 people next year, in addition to replacing everyone who retires or resigns. But they can't just hire without approval, and that has to change.
So, not alone is there a recruitment embargo, Taoiseach, but there's industrial action underway on foot of that. And those that actually run the health service have confirmed for everybody that there is a recruitment embargo, and that it's going to have real effects in terms of junior doctors, home helps, etc. There's also 200,000 people on a diagnostics waiting list, 200,000 people on a community waiting list, and 600,000 on the acute waiting list. That's 1 million people, or just shy of. So I don't know what form of delusion you are labouring under, but I have to tell you, nobody else is. So what I want to know is this. Did the Minister for Health ask for adequate funding? I have to imagine, I don't believe for a second that Minister Donnelly came up with the bright idea to underfund the HSE to the tune of €1.3 billion. I have my criticisms of the Minister, but I don't believe he did anything as reckless as that. So I would like to know within government whose bright idea was that? Was it the Minister for Finance? Was it the Minister for Public Expenditure, Taoiseach? I think the least you owe the Dáil and the people is clarity on that point.
Deputy, absolutely every minister around the Cabinet table looked for more in the budget package, whether it was more on the tax side or more on the spending side. The head of the government, the Taoiseach, looked for more in the budget package than was possible to do, and that's the reality of putting a budget together. Every agency, every department, every minister, including the department of the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, the answer is yes, and the answer is that was the case for every agency, every department and every minister state in the entire government, and that has always been the case. That's how budgets are done. People make a bid for a large amount of money and they only get a fraction of what they ask for. That's how budgets are done, Deputy. And you know, the word recruitment embargo is deliberately misleading by you. As always, you're misleading the public. An embargo is a ban on recruitment. There is no ban on recruitment. The HSE will be allowed to increase its total number of staff next year by 2,000. Where there is a restriction is only where the HSE has already hired the number of people that they are allowed to hire for that grade. And I don't want to see, when we allocate money for therapists, for psychologists, for consultants, I don't want to see that money being diverted to hiring extra managers, extra administrators and doctors that are underqualified. And that has to stop.
Thank you. Tá méid bog a rá go dtí an dara ceist I seachta Holly Cairns.
Taoiseach, business owners in Middleton are meeting this morning to try and plan for the future. Last week, a month's rain fell in the town in the space of just 24 hours, causing utter devastation. I welcome that the government has moved quickly to put in place an enhanced scheme for businesses with up to 100,000 in support now available. Now work needs to be done to ensure that these funds can be drawn down quickly and that the red tape is eliminated. Taoiseach, I'm concerned about the relatively low level of support that's available for homeowners, many of whom have lost everything in these floods. Residents in one estate in Beechwood Drive told the Irish Examiner that they feel abandoned. They don't know how they can rebuild and move on from this disaster when they don't have insurance cover or access to state support. Yesterday, Minister Heather Humphreys announced an additional £3 million in support for homeowners, but it's doubtful that it will be enough to meet the huge need that exists following this disaster. And many homeowners in Cork and Waterford are just utterly confused about the qualifying criteria. They've received no information about how they can apply for support or what they're entitled to. Taoiseach, the grim reality of climate change is that extreme weather events are going to increase and that we are completely unprepared for that inevitability. The people of Middleton have been waiting for nearly a decade for a flood defence scheme, and it could be another decade before it's in place, because the scheme hasn't even gone to planning yet. There are other things that the government could be doing, natural flood defences that can be installed in tandem with necessary engineering solutions. Unfortunately, because of short-sighted decision-making in recent decades, rivers have been stripped of their natural defences. Planning has been granted for building on floodplains. Ditches, culverts, hedgerows and tree cover have been removed, peat bogs have been drained, and poorly planned concrete flood defences have been installed, all of which simply pushes flooding downstream at top speed. Restoring these natural flood defences, which help the land store water and slow the course of rivers upstream, is absolutely essential if we want to minimise the risk of flood damage. Taoiseach, I have 3 questions. Can you guarantee the enhanced scheme for businesses and homeowners in flood-impacted areas will be easily accessible and adequately funded? What is the realistic timeline for the completion of the flood defence works in Middleton? And do you think it's time to come up with a national land use plan? Will the government, if in doing that, maybe incentivise landowners? How would you come up with a plan to do that? And do you recognise the need to do that and not just operate in terms of piecemeal, massive concrete flood infrastructure without an overall plan for the flow of water?
Thanks, Deputy, and thanks for raising this really important issue, which I know is of enormous importance to people in Cork and Waterford, and indeed in other parts of the country that have been affected by flooding, not just in the last few weeks, but in the last few years. And I had a chance to visit Middleton last week, a town that I know very well, and I've seen a lot of flood damage in my time, but this was at a different scale. Flood waters that were up to my arm, and not just water, dirt, mud, sewage, a huge amount of damage done. And I've seen in other floods where people in a shop, for example, or in a house could save their belongings, could save their stock by bringing it upstairs or putting it up high. That just wasn't possible for a huge number of people. Just the scale and speed of the flood, in some cases breaking the glass windows of shop fronts, which is something I have to say I hadn't seen before. And that's why the government responded with the decision that it made on Tuesday, a business scheme where you pretty much get €5,000 up front to help with the immediate costs of clean-up and repair, and then a scheme of up to 20,000 or 100,000 in some cases, particularly where people have lost their stock. This, of course, is for businesses that tried to get flood insurance but couldn't get it despite their best efforts because of where they're located. For homeowners, it's not just for homeowners, by the way, it applies to rental properties as well. We made that change too on Tuesday. People will get the help that they need. It is means tested, but the means test has been relaxed. And again, it's important to bear in mind that if you're over the means test amount, roughly 50,000 for a single person, 90,000 for a couple, it's not that you get nothing. It's that you get 100% if you're under that amount, and you have to make a contribution then if you're above the means test. So even people who have very good incomes will still get some help with the repairs to their property and replacement of white goods and so on. We will make it as simple as possible. Social protection staff, community welfare officers have already gone door to door. They've already paid the first initial grants to a lot of residents, and Red Cross will be doing the same. That'll all be very much up and running this week. And on the social protection side, it was up and running right away. We'll try and make it as simple as possible, but there do have to be checks and balances. Ultimately, this is taxpayers' money, and sadly, as we learned even during the pandemic, when it came to EWIS and when it came to PUP, there were irregularities. So we have to bear in mind this is taxpayers' money and have to make sure that there are some checks and balances, but we will try to minimise that as much as possible. In terms of the flood relief schemes, Minister O'Donovan had a very good meeting with Cork County Council yesterday. due to receive the report on that today. It's still intended to get the flood relief scheme into planning next year, but these are complex schemes that take a lot of time and are often challenged and opposed at Bord Pleanála and in court. We've 50 done and they've worked, 90 in the pipeline, so getting these done. And on the issue of a land use plan, yes, we need a land use plan for Ireland. We are working on that at the moment, very much being led by Minister Hackett, but obviously agriculture involved in that too, and other government departments.
Thanks for your reply, Taoiseach, and I think you understand the impact on the community in Middleton based on your reply, and I suppose with that then you can understand how stressful and anxiety-inducing it is to know that that might happen again and again and again. It's taken, they're waiting a decade for their flood relief works, and it will be another decade before it's introduced. And there's a whole load of impacts that go with that. I know from my own constituency, if you can't get insurance, not only do you have the fear of not being able to afford to kind of rebuild your home or your life, but also you might not be able to get finance to build an extension. It has a massive, far-reaching impact. But I think I'm glad you said you're looking at doing a national land use plan, because ultimately what we have here in relation to climate change is it's as if the tap is on, and the approach so far has been, if the sink's overflowing, to keep mopping up the water that's going on the floor, maybe replace the floor, build a wall around the sink, but not actually go and turn the tap off, which is what we really need. And, the fact that we've had, so many developments on floodplains, consistent deforestation, our agriculture policy is driving the opposite of what you're talking about there in relation to addressing this. And there's been no attempt in that department to move towards this. So can you please acknowledge that all of those things have to change to really reassure communities like Middleton, like other places in Cork and Waterford, that you acknowledge the whole overall approach of government has to change to address climate change? It's here.
Thanks, Deputy. And, I was very struck by some of the people I met telling me that they were affected by the floods in 2015, and nobody could give them the guarantee that it wouldn't happen to them again in a few months' time or a few years' time, long before the flood relief scheme is in place. But we will push that as quickly as we can. We do 50 done. They work. Worked in Bandon, worked in Douglas, worked in Toker, worked in the Talca in Dublin, so we know they work, and we've about 90 more in train. But I agree with your basic point. We have to look at this in the round. It isn't just about flood barriers. We have to consider land use and the impact that inappropriate land use can have on flooding and drainage, and also coastal protections. And a memo went to government only yesterday from Minister Donovan around how we're going to manage the change that's happening to our coastline. Some of it's been happening for millennia, some of it is linked to climate change as well. And I agree that we're all going to have a much greater focus on adaptation as part of climate action. Climate change is a reality. Even if the world reaches net zero by 2050, and it might not, there's a lot more climate change to come. It's baked in, it's going to get worse, there's going to be more of it. And while us reducing our emissions will make a small contribution to slowing down climate change, the most effective thing we can do to protect our people and our property and our infrastructure is adaptation, and we're going to need a much greater focus, I think, on that in the time ahead.
Just before moving on, I think enough time has passed to point out that that's a silent phone, not looking at any particular side of the house, but if we could remember to put the phones on silent, so I bugger Ryan Ishkaji, a Shakta Matt Shanahan for the regional group.
Taoiseach, I think it may be somewhat harsh, but also possibly fair to say that government is not particularly loved or cherished by the people. Most, I suppose, are not. I recently went back to review the relevant Fine Gael manifesto, remembering the deep sense of political change I hoped for with government change in 2011. It is the document of a party having spent a long time wondering what it would do when in power. It is loaded with brave, fresh ideas to remake the country. It has to be said it has an awful bang of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party off of it. Particularly Enda's opening comments that the pre-existing political culture had abandoned the principles underpinning the republic that Fine Gael founded in 1949, had distorted the power and the resources of the state for the benefit of the few, not the many, and had allowed the interests of citizens to be pushed behind those of powerful elites. Strong words that speak to ethics, ambition and hope. Can I ask you, Taoiseach, was this just the stuff that politicians say to win elections? It certainly worked for the South East, winning Fine Gael 7 of the 14 available seats. A decade later, 2 seats are left. I was in the House yesterday for your somewhat, if I may say, dismissive exchange with Deputy Harkin at Leaders' Questions. She presented facts, cold, hard, irrefutable facts that shows the economic disparity in the North West, just like the border, Midlands and indeed the South East. Your response to those fact-based points was to throw out anecdotes. I have seen that playbook in action before. It's the one that I get when I make the economic disparity case for Waterford and the South East in this House. But the facts are clear. Government continues to ignore its own national planning framework along with its Ireland 2040 plan. It stuffs every game-changing project into Cork and Dublin, both now severely bloated, both now suffering from what can only be diagnosed as chronic economic affluenza. 2011 promises to the South East have turned to dust. The M24 motorway has vanished, inserted instead the new M28 Ringaskiddy motorway and the outlandish 400 million Dunkettle roundabout, both proceeding apace. Hundreds of millions spent in state aid and subsidies to regional airports, but Waterford Airport constructively shuttered. 24/7 cardiac care consistently frustrated against the backdrop of ivory back scratchers in the National Children's Hospital. No new courses or buildings after 12 years in power for Waterford University. Nowhere does the manifesto say spend a disproportionate amount of public investment in Dublin or Cork, but that is what we have gotten. Taoiseach, it's my opinion if this government wants the support of the common man, it needs to live its political ethics, ideals and history and stop acting like the government of Ballynagash. This government is letting entire regions stew in their anger. It is likely, when served, these dishes will be best served cold.
Thanks, Deputy. I think in my 20 years in politics, I've often been compared to a particular British politician, Jeremy Corbyn. Wasn't the one. It's been the first time that I've been compared or aligned to him as a politician. I know I've moved to the centre in my middle age. I didn't think I'd move quite that far left, but thank you for giving us something to ponder anyway. Just in relation to 2011, Deputy, and you're right to say that my party has been in office in various coalitions since 2011. We haven't achieved everything we sought to achieve, but I think on the basis of any objective analysis, our country is in a much better place than it was back then. We've gone from mass unemployment and mass youth unemployment to full employment. We've gone from a situation where the IMF were staying over in the Marion Hotel and calling the shots to a position whereby we're in charge of our own affairs again and can make choices. Our public finances are in good order. Educational attainment for children and young people has never been better. Our life expectancy has never been longer. And the UN, and I hope we all agree the UN doesn't vote for Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or the Greens, they're objective. The UN consistently rates us as one of the top 10 countries in the world in terms of human development. That is not in any way to diminish the very real challenges that we have, particularly in relation to the housing shortage and access to healthcare. In fairness, Deputy, I think I responded to some very valid and correct facts that Deputy Harkin put forward with also correct facts. And there's a tendency in this House for people to choose their facts. I think it's okay to respond with other things, so long as they're facts and not opinions. I think we should be able to share them, and you get a better picture than if you look at them in the round, rather than one version of facts that are put out there to support a particular argument. And a point I made, and I don't think you were here, Deputy Howland was, and I could see him nodding at the time, the point that I made, in fact, or one of the points I made, was that while she made a very articulate case for greater investment in the North West, which she feels is the region that has been particularly neglected, I actually said that there were deputies here from the South East who would make the same case for their region. And I had you in mind, and all the deputies from the South East, because everyone makes the case for their own region. And the truth is, achieving balanced regional development is very difficult. Austria, similar challenges we have with Vienna. Denmark, similar challenge with Copenhagen. One big city of international scale, other large cities as well. And trying to achieve balanced regional development is a real dilemma and a real struggle for any small country with a big city in it. And you see that all over the world. London, in Britain, for example, the exact same dilemmas and difficulties arise. But we do have a programme that I believe is achieving much greater balanced regional development. Things like the National Broadband Plan, the biggest single capital investment in the history of the state, Things like the roads programme, which is almost all outside of Dublin and Cork, certainly outside of Dublin, and the technological university, something I'm really committed to making a difference in a lot of regions.
Taoiseach, you may recall at the first nomination of Micheál Martin for Taoiseach, I said I wouldn't support it because basically as a protest at the time for our lack of 24/7 cardiac care. But what I did say was I look forward to engaging with government in a programme that showed equity and transparency at its core. And I would say to you, the South East population makes up 11% of this nation's population. I challenge you from any year from 2011 up to today to show me where 11% of capital funding, the state capital funding, has come into the region. In fact, I'd even challenge you to show me where 5% of capital funding has come into the region. There is no doubt that there's a significant disparity. And I think what Deputy Harkin highlighted yesterday, I highlighted to the Taoiseach last week, showing that discretionary spend for the South East was actually 40% lower than it is for the East Coast and South West. And those are facts, and they are international, irrefutable facts. And beyond this, can I ask you, when this corporation tax feeding frenzy is over, Taoiseach, what will the South East have in terms of strategic infrastructural delivery to point to? Because when I look, I see the N24, N25, nothing spent on them. I see the talk of university action, nothing spent in the university. Not a building will be built there in 5 years to either accommodate students or to teach them. A Model 4 regional hospital not funded like its peers. No demonstrated improvements to our agricultural sector, which is going to suffer extremely badly over the next couple of years. And I would point out that our fledgling aviation sector has received no support. When you were down in 2017, government could have funded it for a quarter of the price now. That's the cost of not delivery.
Thanks, Deputy. I think when you look at government spending, you can't just look at capital. You have to look at current as well. And that covers areas like social protection, education, healthcare. Most of our spending is current, not capital. And when you look at capital projects, you can't just look at the ones over 200 million. You have to look at them in the round. Of course, the smaller projects go more to the more rural counties, and you can't discount them. But to answer your question as to what I think the South East will have in the next 5-10 years, much better roads. Was in the South East yesterday, travelling some of those roads. They've already improved dramatically. Just look at Enniscorthy, look at New Ross, more road investment to come. Much better jobs, and we see that happening already, particularly in Waterford City, with increased investment from multinationals. I think that's going to be a real positive. The expansion of the university, we're in negotiations, as you know well, to secure the Waterford Crystal site, nearly there, and also the new engineering building and on-campus accommodation. I think that's going to happen. We'll do our best to make sure we can get the airport operating again, willing to provide matching finance for that, and that still stands. And then, of course, the implementation of the National Broadband Plan, bringing high-speed fibre to every home, farm and business in every county in the South East and everywhere in Ireland, and that will be transformative. Probably only one of 3 countries in the world that will achieve that.
Thank you very much.
Taoiseach, I wish to raise with you today the matter